Have you ever wondered why your counselor asks you about your childhood? Do you wonder how that correlates to your relationships as an adult or as a teenager? Well, I have some news for you. I will provide you why your counselor may be asking about your childhood today. In this video today, we are going to discuss attachment styles and attachment theory. I'm going to give you a brief introduction on what it is, a little bit of history, and then we'll dive right into the styles and what they mean and how they could correlate to your adult relationships. Let's just quickly run over a couple definitions and dive straight into the history. Attachment theory focuses on relationships and bonds between people. In this example from Very Well Mind, it particularly focuses on your relationship with your parents or caregivers, but it also focuses on romantic relationships. But I want to broaden this a little bit and focus on long-term relationships, or even how we form relationships with other people, both non-romantic and romantic relationships. We have the definition for attachment theory, but what is the actual definition for attachment? The central theme we will focus around today is the attachment between a child and their caregiver. It focuses on how responsive both parties are to each other. Is the primary caregiver meeting the needs of the infant, who then builds trust and feels a sense of security with the primary caregiver? The infant will then learn that that caregiver can or cannot be dependable, depending on how the infant is treated and how those needs are met. This theory was first introduced by John Bowlby, who's a British psychologist. He describes this as a lasting psychological bond or connectedness between human beings, who's primarily focused on the anxiety and distress a child would feel when they are separated from their primary caregiver. From previous behavioral theories, attachment was simply a learned behavior, but Bowlby observed it and noticed that the feedings did not reduce the stress or anxiety. He discovered that attachment characterized clear behavioral and motivational patterns. So attachment could not be a learnt behavior. There had to be something more. Bowlby and others proposed that children have this innate drive to build attachments to their caregivers. Initially, we thought it was food, but Bowlby and others demonstrated that it was the nurturing and the responsiveness of the caregiver, which allowed the child to build an attachment. In the 1970s, Mary Ainsworth greatly expanded upon Bowlby's original study. In her groundbreaking study called The Strange Situation, The Strange Situation was a study for 12 to 18-month-old children who would be brought in a room with their primary caregiver. That primary caregiver would hang out in the room for a bit. The caregiver would leave, and the psychologist would study the behavior and reaction of the child. After a period of time, the caregiver would then return, where the psychologist would again see the reactions of what would happen once the caregiver returns. Through this study, we described three major attachment styles: secure attachment, ambivalent insecure attachment, avoidant insecure attachment. It wasn't until much later we discovered a fourth attachment style through the study of Solomon and Maine. This attachment style was called disorganized insecure attachment. Attachment styles continued to be studied and developed through time. And one of my personal favorites is the one from Erik Erikson. He expanded upon Bowlby's theory, which focused how people relate to society. Yes, you're gonna have to wait to see that in another video. Let's quickly dive in to the 4 different attachment styles and do a little bit of explanation on each and every one of them. First and foremost, secured attachment. Children who could depend on their caregivers are distressed once they are separated from their caregivers, but once reunited, they are joyful, gleeful that their caregiver has returned. Although the child may be upset, they are assured that their caregiver will return. The child is comfortable in reassurance from their caregivers. How many times have you asked your caregiver, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I tough enough? And you have been reassured or affirmed that you are. This is a secure attachment style. The next one is anxious ambivalent or ambivalent attachment. These children showed greater levels of distress when their caregiver left. When their caregiver returned, they both found comfort and tried punishing their caregiver at the same time. This is a result of poor parental availability, meaning that these children cannot depend on their primary caregiver in time of need. This attachment style is uncommon and is roughly about 7 to 15% of US children. The third category is avoidant attachment. In this attachment style, there is no or minimal distress when the caregiver leaves the room. Upon returning, the caregiver is actively ignored or avoided by the child. This attachment style shows no preference between the caregiver and a complete stranger. This attachment style might be due to an abusive or neglectful relationship between the caregiver and the child. Children who are typically punished for relying on a caregiver will not seek help in the future. Do you have problems seeking assistance? Do you have problem asking for help? All of this might, keyword might, relate back to your childhood. Last but not least, we have a disorganized attachment. There's no predictable behavior if the caregiver leaves or comes back when it comes to the child. The children typically seem disoriented, dazed, or confused on what is actually going on. They may avoid or resist the caregiver. They lack a clear attachment pattern. This is likely linked to inconsistent caregiver behaviors. In this attachment style, the caregiver can both be a source of comfort and fear. The child has no idea what to do due to the inconsistencies of their needs being met. So the response is super inconsistent. Our childhood and our relationship with our caregiver can determine how we behave in specific ways in the future. Understanding these attachment styles will allow you to understand why you react the way you do in certain situations within certain relationships. This is why counselors and therapists alike will constantly ask you about your childhood. No, they're not seeing if you have an Oedipus complex. They are simply seeking what attachment styles you have had in the past, which correlates to your attachments in today's society. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding, not only why counselors ask this question, but of how you react with other people. Which attachment style do you believe you have? Please leave a comment below. I would love to hear what styles you believe you have. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, turn on the noties, and even share with a friend. We are all continuously learning together through the world of mental health. This is Papa Pause, and I want you to know that you are loved, appreciated, supported, and belong here. Until next time, my friends, have a fantastic day.